Craig as well. Who would be your 4 best college football teams you've seen so far this year?
Georgia, Cincinnati. I mean, I want to say Oklahoma because they're undefeated, but they're not one of the 4 best I've seen this year. I think Alabama's still one of the 4 best I've seen, even though I wouldn't put them in the playoff directly right now. And after the Oregon game, Ohio State.
Georgia, Cincy, Bama, and then I think it's like a 4-way race for, the 4th spot. I don't think that Oklahoma's clearly, that much better than Ohio State, vice versa. I think that there's a logjam for that 4th spot, but I think, Cincy's definitely got to be right there being unbeaten, although I'm sure we'll hear some knocks about their schedule or something, later on. But regardless of that, they're, sitting there at number 2 for a reason. So you got to have them. You got to have Georgia, obviously. Got to have, I think, Bama at this point. They just, as far as eye test goes and whatnot. And then I don't really have a real great argument for, like, Ohio State looks so much better, and they're clearly, I don't have that. I don't have that for Ohio State or Oklahoma or Oregon or any other team that you want to throw in that mix. So I can only give you 3 right now. But that's why the rankings don't matter right now. Yeah. So we don't need 4. We just, we need 4 at the end of the year. But we got to do this thing where we talk about 4 right now. So I'm curious to see what the argument is for number 4. If it's just Oklahoma, they go flat with the polls. There's a case to be made for them. There's also a case to believe that they might not, remain in the mix given their upcoming schedule and the fact that they have to play Baylor and Iowa State and Oklahoma State. But if they get through that, regardless of how ugly or pretty it is, if they get through that, then there's not going to be denying their spot in this mix of 4 teams.
What happens if you get to that last week and Oregon has 1 loss? And I know we sometimes, there's going to be 9 teams that remain undefeated. Well, a lot of them are going to play each other, and there's really not that many left. You have Georgia, and you have Cincinnati, and you have Oklahoma, Michigan, and Michigan State. They play this weekend. Wake Forest is undefeated. We highlighted them yesterday. SMU, they play Cincinnati. They're unbeaten, and San Diego State's rolling along, and UT San Antonio. What happens, though, if, in fact, at the end of the year, Oregon and Ohio State are in the same position as Baylor and TCU were? And in those 2 teams, neither one of them made it. The argument was about head-to-head or whatever. What happens if Ohio State's selected over Oregon? Then why do you play games?
Yeah, I think that if Ohio State's selected over Oregon, that's kind of nonsense because, again, there's no punishment for Ohio. That's if they both would win out, obviously. But if they both win out and win their conference, then I think if you're the committee, you got to say, look, you got to punch Ohio State for something because that's just going back to the same thing of, when LSU beat Alabama and then had to play them again, Alabama suffered no penalty for losing to LSU, and LSU got no benefit from winning the conference. They had to turn around and beat a team they barely beat before in the national championship game. So that's the same thing. It doesn't matter when it was that it was in week 3 or 4 or 2, whenever it was. Look, Ohio State should suffer a little bit for that loss, and if it comes down to them in Oregon, it should be Oregon because Oregon beat them.
That's where they kind of put themselves in a pickle because, teams do get better as the year goes along, and teams get worse as the years go along. So I think if you were to replay Ohio State, Oregon right now, who's to say what that looks like? Should they go by the head-to-head result? Absolutely. But is it understandable if somebody on the committee weeks later now looks at it and goes, well, that's not the same 2 teams that played a few weeks ago? Yeah, and that's why, having that human part of it makes it unpredictable and makes it, makes it open for some biases and, makes it kind of curious of what they're going to do. I'm also curious to see with UTSA and SMU both being undefeated, being amongst the ranks of the, very few who are still undefeated at this point. And the one thing about their schedules is neither team's beating a top 25 team or anybody of like major substance where you can point to like they've got this many and they've got this many. So I'm curious how that's viewed. If it's more, hey, they're undefeated and they get respect just for that, or if they break them down the way they break other teams down when they're trying to create some separation. So
Cincinnati has the win against Notre Dame that gives them that oomph, that oomph win, and as you mentioned. And if SMU, though, beats Cincinnati,
right,
heck, that's That's a better win than beating Notre Dame.
But as of right now, they don't have a win like that. So that's what I'm saying. I'm curious to see that if those two remain unbeaten, how is that eventually weighed into things? But again, it may not matter after this weekend, so we'll see.
From Tony, because picking Oregon leaves the networks liable for a nationwide outbreak of cirrhosis of the eye caused by too much exposure to their uniforms, and we get a few more of you as well. One of the things about when I brought up Ohio State and Oregon, even though there's so many more games, both of them could lose games even going forward, and most likely there's a chance one of them or both of them loses yet another game. The problem I bring up, the reason I bring that up is if Ohio State had beaten Oregon earlier in the year, had they beaten Oregon earlier in the year, and then lost to, let's say, whoever, Iowa, Penn State, Michigan, whoever, would we say the same thing about that early win that sometimes Oregon, let's say Oregon goes on a roll? Of course, in the Pac-12, that's not going to be much of a resume.
There's different rules for different people, and we've seen that for years. And that. But if you did, that's precisely what Oregon has done so far. They beat Ohio State, and they lost to somebody that's far less than Ohio State. So because they have that loss, they could theoretically, the committee could make that same argument of like, well, yes, they did beat Ohio State, but their loss is to a team that's worse than them, just like Baylor's loss to West Virginia was somehow a lot worse than TCU's loss to Baylor.
Straight up.
But It's like they took the fact that Baylor was the team TCU lost to out of that. Like it just, they weren't a candidate in it anyway.
I want to read this. This is not about the argument, but I want to read this because we appreciate Zach Sloter. I think it's Sloter. Hello from Ames, Iowa. I used to hate Baylor until I started listening to you guys. You guys are my favorite sports talk show now. Keep up the good work and go Cyclones. Zach, that's awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Zach. I know there's not really an affinity for Baylor from Ames, Iowa. He definitely picked up on that over the years. But, hey, we're just regular old people too, and we appreciate you and definitely respect what Matt Campbell and company are doing, and I wrote in my power rankings today, they're probably the hottest team in the Big 12 just in terms of the way they're being talked about, even though OU's the undefeated, and you've got Baylor and Oklahoma State playing really well. It seems like after last weekend and that win, Iowa State's kind of being looked at as that team that could go on a run these next few weeks and find themselves in the title game. So wouldn't be surprised to see that. But going back to Oregon, Ohio State, the thing about like discussing all this is I know the fun of the playoff ranking show is to do exactly what we're doing right now. That's why they do it, is to get everybody talking and generate buzz. But it's just hard for me to really get too in the mud about Ohio State and Oregon right now when Oregon's only top 25 win is Ohio State. They're not going to play another top 25 team the rest of the way. So the only game of real substance on their schedule will be Ohio State when it's all said and done. Meanwhile, Ohio State, yes, they lost to Oregon, but at the same time, they are going to close their schedule. The last month, they're going to play number 20 Penn State this weekend, and their final two weekends are top 10 Michigan and Michigan State. Now, those obviously won't both be top 10 teams probably at that point again, but Ohio State, Oregon right now, you can go Oregon win the head-to-head and blah, blah, blah. But by the end of the year, if both run their schedules, I'm taking Ohio State over Oregon, even though they lost the head-to-head.
All right, but who is Ohio State beating?
If they go through the end of the year is what I'm saying.
I understand. And Penn State right now hanging in the top 25. They're hanging by a thread. But they would eventually beat most likely a top 10 team, you're right, Michigan or Michigan State. They would, then the Big Ten championship, of course, that would be, if it's Iowa, which it most likely be, they most likely by then will be somewhere around 10 or better. So there's a couple of top 10 wins. But yet again, it's like Oregon's being penalized because the rest of their conference isn't very good, and Ohio State's fortunate because their division this year seems to be pretty good. It still has to mean something, and especially since that win against Oregon, or by Oregon, was at Columbus. And it's yet like it's like that game doesn't count at all. Yeah, they beat them in September, and since that time, Ohio State's won 12 in a row, or whatever it might be. It's just a topic. 254-339-1122.
I'm with you. Head-to-head has to matter, but, when it's like the first month of the season and you play all these other games, those have to matter too. I don't think you should be able to just hang your hat. Basically, you would just be hanging your hat on that one win you got in, September, early October. And that's it, really. And it's not their fault that there's no other competitive teams in the Pac-12 right now that are being talked about and being, put in the rankings and all of that. Arizona State had started off hot and then fell off. But, yeah, you can't penalize them for that. And, Oregon's just got to keep winning. You just keep winning to make it interesting. I have a hard time just making a solid, yes, it should be this way because I know what games are coming up. So right now, yeah, Oregon should be above Ohio State. I agree with that.
But that's why I brought it up because there is a debate there, and it's a legitimate debate.
But right now, no,
either
they
side,
should be ahead.
Yeah, either side to me. But right now, Ohio State's already ranked higher than Oregon in the poll, and yeah, it's been 4 or 5 games since then, but it's almost like, well, yeah, but that's Ohio State, and they're running the table the rest of the way. Even we don't know that, and so they might get knocked off at any time. Maybe it's Penn State. I don't think so, and then it won't even be a discussion because then they'll have 2 losses.
But I do have a question for you. They beat Ohio State head-to-head, but does their loss to Stanford not matter?
No, it does matter. It's just like the loss to Baylor, the loss by Baylor in 14 to West Virginia on the road mattered.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the loss to Stanford still matters. 31-24. I don't even know
35-28 was the Ohio State-Oregon score. It's the same thing.
At Ohio State.
I get that, yeah.
31-24, and Stanford scored an overtime to beat them. So if that game's going to be broken down as that's a bad loss, then what about Alabama against unranked A&M, who had just lost to Mississippi State? See, that's all about. That's why it's kind of like almost a spider web, how we can paint the pictures. And listen, I understand. I was stunned Oregon not only beat Ohio State, they punched him in the mouth and made him like it.
But the fact that we have to have this debate, or the committee has to have this debate, is more reason why they have to fix the playoff. Because when you're starting to, because then eventually you start to really split hairs. And what Kirby Hocutt or Jeff Long or whoever was the spokesman should have gone to say when Reese Davis asked him, why do you think these are the best 4 teams? Say, we watched all the film. We have experts in the room. This is what it is. And this team schedules better. They're a better team. That's it. That's the only real reason, because when you start getting the weeds of the Stanford loss was was worse than the Oregon, all that stuff ultimately is splitting hairs. And that's why they've created a system that kind of collapses in on itself and creates so much controversy. But part of them, I think, likes that because it creates people watching a show for 7 weeks that doesn't matter.
And that's why I'm not going to be watching it all. I'm not one of those that, they fooled me once in that first year, and I'm a big college football fan, but I get nothing out of that playoff show. I mean, I have a much easier time just, what are the rankings at the end of it? Okay, cool. Let's break down why they said what they said, but I don't need to sit through 30 minutes to an hour of whoever telling me why, blah, blah, blah. I would imagine that if they gave a little more insight into the debates that actually go on, that'd be interesting to see, and more of rather than just throwing phrases or something out there to explain it, tell me why. Yeah, why should Ohio State and Oregon situation be looked at this way or that way? And that does make for fun. It makes fun for us talking about it. But again, I think the timing of the playoff show is kind of dumb because there's so many big games left.
Yeah.
There's so many huge games.
But money?
I know why. I know why. I'm just saying, I think, okay, take the one thing that everybody obsesses over 24/7 out of the equation for once, and let's not worry about money, which I know will be hard for most people out there, but take that out of the equation. There's no point because there's too many big games left that matter. I mean, Ohio State, yeah, like the Oregon game. So what? They played 3 top 20 teams in the next 4 weeks. So we'll know about Ohio State, and we'll know about Oregon, and we'll know a lot more in December rather than what a game in week 2 did. But yeah, that game should matter for Oregon. They should not be necessarily behind Ohio State, but you know that loss to Stanford.
It's all about timing when you win.
Whereas
and lose too.
A&M's loss to Mississippi State doesn't probably matter as much because they beat it. You know what I'm saying? It's weird how it works. You're
Matt
right.
in D.C., head-to-head matter? How about 2016 Penn State beat Ohio State, won the Big Ten. Won the Big Ten, and Ohio State made the playoff over them. They won the game and then won the Big Ten, which also means they won the division. The tiebreaker is the highest television ratings, period. Matt in D.C.
Yeah,
we
that's
appreciate
true.
that, Matt. Also, from the 5-1-3, Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech that same year. They won the national title in 14 at home, and then went on to be the number 4 seed, beating Alabama and Oregon. Yeah, we've seen the 4 seed win it, and that was a buzz. I mean, Ohio State went on a just get out of my way type tour with the Cardell Jones and all that. I mean, that was an amazing, very impressive run. And they validated themselves. But, yeah, they lost to Virginia. I remember that. They lost to Virginia Tech at home, and then here they come, despite the injuries at quarterback as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was an incredible run. Ezekiel Elliott was a big part of that. And, that was a situation where, like when the Baylor TCU thing happened, who was happier than the committee to have Ohio State just sitting right there for them to be able to justify, and like, we don't have to deal with these private schools from Texas? Great, here come the Buckeyes, and that's how it's going to probably be as long as it's a 14 field. You're going to get more of the blue bloods and more of the TV rating type teams. But yeah, the one thing about the 14 field is it does create a ton of conversation, a ton of debate, because you have so few spots. And if you were to, Mike Leach is just a crazy person in the best kind of way. But, he advocated at one point for like a 64-team field like March Madness. And yeah, of course he did, because that's the only way he'll ever make the playoff. But that wouldn't, to me, be all that fun. But having a little bit more of an expanded field, so you didn't have to debate Ohio State, Oregon to this extent. Both teams would just be in, and rightfully so. Like, to me, as a fan, that probably would be more fun. But I know it doesn't make for as much, TV chatter and things like that.
From Big Blue Attack, thank you for the super chat. We appreciate it. I didn't see an attachment to that, but thank you very much. Also, Bazoo, Ohio State's still going to lose another game. So we don't have to worry, and that's a possibility. And Oregon will probably, there's a chance they lose another game. Who knows? Let's see from